My dear, you saw the storm hiding behind my smile and stayed. You noticed the ache I hid behind every "I'm fine." You didn't flinch when my silence screamed the truth. You caught the tremble in my voice that others ignored. You read the sadness stitched between my jokes. You saw the goodbye in my eyes long before I said it. You saw the tear I wiped before anyone else noticed. You noticed my joy was just makeup over grief. You didn't ask why I was quiet. You understood. You stared into my chaos and called it beautiful. You caught the pain I whispered between deep breaths. You saw my soul flinch even when I smiled. You noticed I was drowning while others praised how I swam. You recognized the mask I wore wasn't strength, it was survival. You understood my silence was louder than my words. You saw the fracture in my laughter before it broke me. You looked at me like I wasn't broken, just rare. You felt the distance I built while standing right beside you. You saw me hiding behind strong and still chose me. You read my heart when I lost the words. You found the real me under layers no one dared touch. You saw grief behind my sarcasm and didn't laugh. You felt the prayer in my shaking hands. You saw what I didn't know how to confess. You heard the goodbye buried inside my hello. You knew my loudness was a disguise for aching silence. You found me in places I tried to bury myself. You loved the version of me no one believed existed. You recognized my love even when it came wrapped in fear. You touched the parts of me I swore were untouchable. You saw me clinging to strength like it was air. You heard the heartbreak I never admitted. You believed me when I said I was tired, without proof. You saw that I wasn't healing, I was hiding. You noticed I was fading while everyone else was celebrating. You found the sorrow tucked in my "I don't care." You noticed I looked away every time they praised me. You saw I was hurting before I even knew it. You recognized me as art, even in pieces. You knew I was running, even when I stood still. You spotted the past still bruising my present. You heard the silence I screamed in. You sensed the goodbye before I even whispered it. You knew I was pretending to be whole. You held space for my mess, not just my magic. You looked at me like I was still worth choosing. You caught the apology buried in my coldness. You saw the guilt in my over-explaining. You knew I wasn't hard to love, just scared to be. You sensed my hope dying in my laughter. You felt the earthquake beneath my stillness. You believed the version of me I had buried. You saw the grief in my overgiving. You noticed the purr in every "I'm okay." You saw through my light and loved my shadows. You heard the heartbreak behind my hustle. You recognized the cry in my quiet. You noticed my strength was made of pain. You saw my tenderness beneath the armor. You read the longing I tried to silence. You sensed the ache in my stillness. You spotted the truth when I was busy pretending. You touched the wound I hid behind logic. You saw the weight I carried without asking why. You recognized the sorrow no one else dared to name. You caught the love I was terrified to show. You noticed my smile cracked every time you looked away. You sensed I was a storm trying to be a breeze. You heard my plea in the silence between texts. You loved me even when I didn't look lovable. You looked closer when everyone else turned away. You saw my truth tangled in fear. You found the poem I buried under scars. You loved the chaos no one dared to explore. You watched me fall and still reached out. You heard the thunder in my stillness. You felt the grief clinging to my joy. You understood what I meant when I said nothing. You saw my spirit blinking in the dark. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. You spotted my fear of being truly known. You saw the exile in my smile. You read the sorrow sewn into my silence. You felt my heart close every time I opened up. You touched my rage without flinching. You recognized the child still crying inside me. You spotted the battle behind my boundaries. You knew my distance was my defense. You saw a warrior where others saw a wound. You noticed the silence I used to scream. You felt the crack in my confidence. You sensed I was vanishing in plain sight. You noticed I was hiding behind being helpful. You loved the truth I tried to bury. You honored the story behind my scars. You met the version of me I thought no one would love. You held the space my pain refused to fill. You believed in the light I kept doubting. You stayed when I made it hard to love me. You saw what I became to survive and loved me anyway. You caught the goodbye I whispered to myself long before I said it aloud. You spotted the wound I stitched with silence. You saw through my calm and heard the chaos. You noticed the way I flinched when love got too close. You sensed I was building walls, not boundaries. You heard the heartbreak in my over-explaining. You knew I was lying when I said I'm better now. You spotted the storm that hadn't arrived, but already lived inside me. You read the pain I wrote in invisible ink. You noticed my smile wilted every time your name came up. You felt my guilt before I confessed. You knew I was fragile beneath the fearless. You spotted the way I broke in beautiful ways. You saw me unravel in perfect silence. You noticed how loud my absence felt. You read the ache in my stillness. You looked past my pride and saw the prayer. You caught the fear in every forced smile. You felt the love I tried not to show. You recognized the goodbye I kept postponing. You saw the hope I swore I lost. You knew my laughter was stitched from pain. You noticed I was vanishing slowly, with every word unspoken. You read my retreat as self-protection, not rejection. You sensed I was afraid of being remembered wrong. You caught the flicker of grief in my joy. You knew I wasn't healing, I was hiding again. You saw me choosing silence to avoid collapse. You noticed I longed for touch, but feared it too. You read between the lines I never wrote. You saw the exit in my eyes. You felt the apology I buried under anger. You spotted the way I grieved while loving. You knew my anger came from being unseen. You noticed my overthinking was screaming for peace. You saw the shattered pieces I kept neatly arranged. You looked into my chaos and chose to stay. You caught the moment I stopped trusting myself. You noticed I smiled more when you stopped watching. You recognized the strength I forged from abandonment. You read the shame I wore like armor. You saw me pulling away while reaching out. You noticed the exhaustion in my perfection. You spotted my need for softness beneath all my sharp. You sensed I was afraid to need anyone. You saw the silence between my breaths. You read my brokenness like a language. You saw the don't leave I couldn't say. You felt my loyalty even when I fell quiet. You recognized I had already started grieving you. You knew I was asking for help with my eyes. You noticed the fracture before I crumbled. You looked past my strong and asked, "Are you safe?" You saw the past still echoing in my choices. You noticed the trembling behind my bravery. You saw my collapse before I even stumbled. You felt the weight of my regrets without me saying a word. You spotted the moment I stopped believing in forever. You heard my goodbye long before I said hello. You knew I was mourning what never even happened. You saw the heartbreak in my hesitation. You noticed the resistance in every yes I gave. You caught the hesitation hiding behind my eagerness. You recognized my fire came from abandonment. You knew the silence was sacred, not empty. You read the poem I hid behind every pause. You spotted the wish inside my silence. You noticed the scream I buried beneath my smile. You saw the unfinished goodbye in my eyes. You recognized the moment I stopped trusting love. You spotted the self-doubt masquerading as independence. You knew I was afraid of being chosen too late. You noticed the grief I carried for people still living. You heard the desperation between my laughter lines. You read my heartbreak through the way I held back. You saw the apology in my distance. You noticed I was learning to let go. Even of you, you felt the weight of every word I didn't send. You recognized my silence wasn't peace, it was restraint. You caught the final goodbye in my stillness. You knew I was hiding inside a body, still pretending to be okay. You saw that I wanted love, but didn't believe in it. You noticed how my spirit shrank every time I tried to please. You caught the heartbreak in my resilience. You spotted the echo of goodbye before it shattered me. You recognized the emptiness behind my ambition. You saw I was protecting the parts no one loved. You noticed I only smiled when alone. You read the collapse in my confidence. You felt I was preparing for abandonment. You saw the ghost of betrayal in my eyes. You recognized my love didn't come with safety. You noticed the panic in my people-pleasing. You saw the numbness behind my "of course." You felt the ache I masked as grace. You read my sadness like scripture. You caught the prayer in my exhaustion. You noticed how I avoided mirrors and meaning. You saw the truth I was terrified you'd find. You loved the version of me I never dared show.